let's start the session of Marnix. So his session will be a complete DAX evening, which is a topic also at my heart.
Yeah,
so,
I know.
This is one of the best evenings, I think. And Marnix will start presenting about calculation groups, and I want to wish you all the best.
Sure, thank you. So that's a great turnout, guys, given how it's a soccer night and all. Still this amount of people showing up, it's good. Good to see. Yeah, so calculation groups. Before I get started, though, I'd like to get to know the audience a little bit. Could you raise your hand if you, so let's start at the base. If you never built a Power BI report and a Power BI data set and report on top of it. If you never did that. So, but almost everyone built. I mean, that was to be expected, given this is a Power BI community night and all. If I would ask this at the Tableau night, I'd probably get more hands coming up. How about calculation groups? Who used calculation groups? Raise your hand if you did. Quite some, but by far not everyone. By far not everyone. So that's good. So yeah, we're going to start at the basics, and then we're gonna go from there. Okay. So let's get started. So a little bit about myself. So Power BI. So I transferred from finance to Power BI, which is quite common actually. See more people doing that. So I've been consulting the past 6 years and training. I speak at these kind of events, and I like to write blogs and do videos and stuff on Power BI related topics. But I'm not here to talk about myself. I'm here to talk about calculation groups. So I started off by defining. I did look for a definition, but haven't found one. So I just came up with something myself. A collection of DAX expressions called calculation items, yes, created in tabular editor for now. Yeah, I saw that it is on the roadmap. So the Power BI team. And so a tabular model does allow for this functionality. However, out of Power BI, you simply are unable to access it. So what you're going to do, you use an external tool, in this case, tabular editor, and then you can, right? So then you can access calculation groups and build them and add them to your tabular model and use them in Power BI. That appears as a regular table in Power BI. Well, that is very true. And have the purpose of replacing measures on a report. So you got a measure and a calculation group is going to replace that measure by something better, hopefully. Yeah. So I'm sure that like if it is a relatively new concept, then this doesn't help much. But what we're going to do, I'm going to go by a couple of use cases tonight, and then I mean for you guys to understand what calculation groups are just by getting to following along with the use cases. So some scenarios that you'll be able to apply them. For one, allow your report users to switch measures in the chart. So you got a chart. Basic as this, I have a very simple chart, and I just have the trend of my discount percentage, and I want to allow my users to just click on the slicer here and select another measure. Yeah, that's a very basic setup, very basic scenario, and so we'd be able to set that up. There's a few other ways though that you'd be able to also provide for this experience, and I'm just going to go by them. There's probably more, but there's a few. So you'd be able to personalize visuals. That is just an option. So you're going to go into your settings, right? Power BI Desktop. Go in your report settings, and what you're going to do, you turn this on. Personalized visuals. So, and after you did, what's going to happen once you publish to the Power BI service, right? There's going to be an additional tiny little button here, but you hover over it, and it'll tell you this is personalized this visual. So end users are actually able to personalize a visual, and they can do all sorts of stuff to that visual, including changing the measure. Okay. So, but for this particular purpose, this might be a little bit of an overkill because you allow for them to do far more than just changing the measure that you're using. But it would be a solution to the scenario. Bookmarks, of course. Bookmarks. I think that there's only one limitation that bookmarks have, and that is your own imagination. Right? Other than that, bookmarks allow for doing anything, including providing for this user experience. But it's a little awkward to set it up. It's a little hard to maintain. It's not very robust. So I don't think that I would advise this as a solution for this scenario. And then, of course, field parameters. Yeah. So it's relatively new. A couple months ago, I think. A couple months ago, it's been added. And so what you're going to do? You set this to fields. And then, indeed, let me move over to my laptop and show you how this works in Power BI Desktop itself. So I have that open here. Here we go. So if I have a chart here, I have that same chart that I just showed you, which is just going to show you one individual measure. Yep. So what we're going to do, we're going to go over to parameters, go over to field parameters. Here you'd be able to select the measures that you want to have your report users choose among. Yep. So hit create. This is going to include a parameter table here in my model. I left the default settings on, so I get this little slicer here. So now I need to make sure that I, instead of the measure, get the parameter individual for the y-axis. And here you go. So that is relatively simple to set up, right? Very powerful, but very simple to set up. Yes, you could also use a calculation group for this purpose, but now that we have field parameters, this is probably an easier way to set this up. Then, next, what we want to allow for our users to do for all these four different measures, present them in a different time calc. Yeah, so year on year, month on month, year to date, the same period last year, etc., etc. So you want to have, for all these four measures, you want to have just a list of time calcs that you want to have your users choose among. If you don't have tabular editor, right? How would you set this up? I want to provide for a little bit of context, so I do want to tell you how to do that. And I mean, tabular editor, well, there's 2 and there's 3, right? So 3 is a commercial product, so you'd have to pay like $10 a month or so, but 2 is free. You just download it and you install it and you go, right? You got calculation groups. Unless, of course, it's not your own machine. You're working on your company's machine, then you need to go to your IT and say, could you please download and install? But then if they say no, then what are you going to do? Okay, so let me give a little bit of context and show you how you would do this if you did not have tabular editor at your disposal. So I'm going to get rid of this now. Remove this out of here, because I'd need to include a few measures here to my measures table. No worries, I came prepared. Yeah, let me start off by first including this here table into my data set. So go over here. I'm going to add a new table. So I enter a little bit of code. So all this does, it just creates a new table, the data table formula, with a 1 column holding these 2 values. Okay, that's all that I've added. It's a disconnected table. Literally, I do not connect this to any tables of my star schema. So I'm just going to leave this as is in my data set. And yes, I have this option now to also add these 2 values to a slicer, obviously. Yeah. So I can select an item, but of course it's still not going to do anything. Yeah, I have to set this up, right? So we need a few measures in order for this to start doing what we needed to. So let me just copy paste the code for these measures. New measure. So indeed, we need a measure for dates Y to D. Gross sales, right? I'm just getting gross sales so far. So let me get the gross sales measure for same period last year. New measure. So now I just added those 2 measures here to my data set. I still need an additional measure to allow for my report users to toggle between the 2. Yeah? So I got yet another measure here. The switch. So yet a new measure. There we go. So this measure, if the selected value here in the time intel table that I just created, so if my user selected this here value here, same period last year, well, then that is the measure that should get evaluated. And if it's Y to D, then the other one, obviously. No selection is just the measure itself. That is basically what we're doing here. So now I'm going to use this here measure. And then find that, indeed, this works. So this is how you would set things up if you don't have tabular editor at your disposal. The thing is, though, that I did actually do this at a client of mine a couple years ago before calculation groups were around. So if you got 4 different measures and you got 2 different time calcs, yeah, it's doable, right? But if you got 20 different measures and you got 8 different time calcs, then you end up with hundreds of measures in your data set. And I did actually have to build a model, so you have to really be consistent in your naming convention and whatnot, but still, I mean, it's not the most exciting job to set all that up, nor is it easy to maintain. So there's a better way. There's a better way in which we'd be able to achieve the same thing, and that will be calculation groups. So let me go ahead and here enter my net sales, and there we go. So I'm going to go over here, external tools, tabular editor 3. I could also use tabular editor 2 for this particular purpose. For now, I'm using tabular editor 3. So here goes. So what we're going to do. So this is the tabular additive 3. So who's familiar with tabular additive 3? Raise your hand. Not everyone yet, okay. But it's very similar to 2, okay, when it comes to this particular purpose. It has IntelliSense, though, which is really nice. Anyhow, what we're going to do. So in order to make sure that I be able to convert all of these measures into different time calcs, I'm going to add a calculation group. Yeah, so let me go ahead and do so. Right mouse click, create a calculation group. Okay, so this calculation group, I'm going to call this calculation group time Intel. There we go. So we need to include a few calculation items. Yep. So we got a few, right? So same period last year. Yep. So here in the DAX expression, here I'm going to actually enter an expression. So we're going to say calculate the selected measure. Okay, selected measure. So this is here key. Selected measure, and this is the same period last year. Same period last year. So this selected measure here. So this is just going to take whatever measure you got on your report and it will replace it. Right? So the measure that you have is just going to be inserted here. Right? This is what I meant by replacing a measure on your report page. So we're going to do the same thing. Also create a new calculation item for Y2D. Similar, calculate selected measure. Oh. Dates Y2D. There we go. Okay, so I created it. Oh, not is selected measure, just selected measure. I'll get to that later. Okay, so Control S save. I can also click here on this button. Do the same thing. Confirm. Yeah. So make sure that you commit this to the tabular model, and then it'll be visible in Power BI Desktop. So if I move over here now, then we get this here table. The calculation group. Seen it yet though. Save changes back. There we go. Refresh now. And here it is. There we go. I didn't change the name. I could have changed the name here into something more useful. Let me go ahead and do that. So time calc. This is because the users get to see this name, what you're using here. So let's call this time calc. Or anything that you might want to call this, right? Time calc. There we go. Okay, so here we go. So now I can switch. So I have a measure here, just a measure taken out of my measures table, a regular measure, and I can go ahead and now have this one measure get updated for my selection. Yeah, but if I take another measure, if I were to not take net sales but gross sales, it's also going to work. There you go. So this is extremely powerful, right? So I now only need to write these 4 time calcs once, and I apply them to all of the measures that I got. So this is very powerful technology. Moving on next, because I also want to do something else here. What I want to do is say I have a scenario where I'm actually comparing the months to one another. So I'm comparing whatever my performance was in January to my performance in February. But then that's not a level playing field, because January's got more days than February. So it's apples and oranges, actually, what you're comparing. Then, so we have to come up with a solution for comparing January and February. So what we're going to do, we just take the daily average, right? Because that will be a fair comparison. So we have to, but then now I need the daily average, but I want to have the daily averages computed for all of my measures. I don't want to have to write an average for all of my measures individually. So yes, calculation groups once again. So I'm going to also add a calculation group that just does that. Averages. Create calculation group. Here we go. And then we add a calculation item. Calculation item, well, it's going to be daily average. I mean, you can also add a calculation item for weekly average or monthly average or whatnot. But I'm going to stick to daily average for now. And so we're going to say divide whatever the selected measure might be by the count rows of my calendar table. Because the granularity of my calendar table is day. So I'm just dividing it by the amount of days visible in the filter context. Yeah? Okay. So I'm going to hit Ctrl S, refresh. There we go. So here it is, my calculation group, my averages. daily, there's only one, obviously, because I only created one. So there we go. So I hit that daily average. And this works, right? So let me turn this into some other kind of chart. Doesn't really matter, but let me give you data labels. So we got 5 mil, but if I select daily average, this comes down to 161K. So yes, intuitively, that is the daily average. So this works, right? And I could do this for any other measure. So now let me show you what happens if I take the year to date. Now this doesn't make any sense. So I have two calculation items active at the same time. I wouldn't actually be able to take 2 calculation items out of the same calculation group and activate them at the same time. Okay? But I can take 2 calculation items out 2 different calculation groups and activate them at the same time, like I'm doing right now. But now I get this result, a daily average. That doesn't make any sense, right? It should not be going up by this much. That makes no sense. It should remain at the same level, approximately throughout the year. So there's something off. Something is off. And that has to do with calculation group precedence. Which one precedes the other, if you will. So let me go ahead. Calculation group precedent. Okay, so we have these exact 2 calculation items active now on my report. And so the question is, which one gets applied first? So right now, the metric gets applied first. So the selected measure by the count rows, right? I just wrote that measure. That is how I compute the daily average. If that gets applied first, then what do we get? We'll get there. Yeah. So we apply the metric first. And then next, afterwards, we apply the time calc. So let me show you again. So then the selected measure here in the metric that has been applied first, right? The selected measure now gets replaced by the time calculation. And then last but not least, the actual measure here is replaced. So this will be the DAX expression that would result after when you're going to apply these 2 time intelligence calculations in this particular order. Then this is what we got. So we're dividing the numerator, and it's too bad that this just ended working. I don't know why. Well, I show you this. I'm just going to show you here. This will be the numerator, and we're dividing. Oh, excuse me, not this part. The numerator will be this part, and we're dividing that by a denominator, right? That is what we're doing now. Let me show you exactly what the result is going to be. Here, over here in Power BI. So I need to let's convert this to a table, remove everything for now. So we have the numerator, which is this part. So let me include that in my measures. And then the denominator part of that divide formula is this part. Measure. So I get a numerator. And there you go. So the issue here is that I have this here measure that gets affected by my Y2D time calc, right? So that actually takes the year-to-date value. It changes the filter context. And so instead of just the values for that particular month, it takes the year-to-date values. But it doesn't do that for the denominator, for the amount of days. So now I'm actually dividing apples by oranges here. So that doesn't make any sense, right? That is why we got these funny results. So what are we going to do? How do we fix this? Well, let me bring them back, put them where they are, and do it the other way around. So this time, I'm going to first apply that time calc. So I'm going to go ahead and do so. And then afterwards, I'm going to apply the metric. And then we have that replaced by the actual measure. So if we manage to somehow have the engine do the evaluation in this order, then we'd be okay, right? Because now both the numerator as well as the denominator are going to get affected by the calculate formula, which changes the filter context into the Y2D. So if we manage to somehow tell the engine, please do it the other way around, right? We don't want you to do it in this order, but in the other way around. So we can. And indeed, this is a concept called the calculation group precedence. So this is an arbitrary value, the 1 here. So is the 0 here. The only thing that you need to be aware of, the higher the value, the sooner it gets applied. So what we need to do somehow, we've got to make sure that this value is more than 1. Right? So if I turn this into a 2, then that's more than 1. Now I expect that this gets evaluated in the correct order. So let me remove what I entered in there. And let me do gross sales. And there you go. So now we get some kind of consistent value throughout the year. And this is actually the value that we were out for, the value that we were expecting. Yeah? So it's something that you need to take into account, right? I mean, calculation groups, yes, there is some hidden complexity, which is this kind of stuff. Okay, so we have this set up all the way. Then let me move on to another use case. Move on over here. Let me take a value out of my countries table. Actual countries in a table. And let me go ahead and enter my net sales, or gross sales, doesn't matter. Now let's assume that the values here, is this visible in the back? Or should I make it a little bigger? You guys okay? You guys okay? Let's assume that these are local currencies. Yeah, so that is what we got in our data set, local currency values. So then that is all perfectly fine, except for the value here, of course, because we're adding apples and oranges. It doesn't make any sense to have a value here at the bottom line. Also, I want to have them formatted nicely. I want to have just the actual currency format of that actual country. Okay, but what I want to do is I have a little slicer here, but I also want to be able to convert this to euros. So I want to set this to euros, then have the actual values converted into euro values, and then obviously the number formatting should be euros. Okay, so that is the requirement, the report user requirements. So we got to set that up, and obviously calculation groups. So what we're going to use here. So we need to include a new calculation group. Create a new calculation group, and so we're going to call this calculation group foreign exchange, something like that. And so for local, so we want to get rid of that value at the total level, right? So the way in order to determine whether we are at the total level is just count the amount of values of this here column, because for every here value within the table, it gets filtered down to only one value. Right? So if it has one value, then we know that we are somewhere here in the table. But if that's not the case, then we're here at the total line. Yeah? So what we're going to say, if, let me see, oh, I need to create a calculation item, of course. For local, if the country if the selected value, and let me say if has one value, let me put it that way, has one value, dim country, country, if that is the case, right, then we just want to have the selected measure. We don't want to do any funny, we don't want to convert this. I mean, the local values are the local values, so that's just fine. But if we're not, if this is not true, right, if this is false, then we know we're at the total line. Just give me a blank. Yep. So now we have something for local. Indeed, I need to refresh again. So I'm going to start off calculation for exchange. Move this over here. And it's gone. Right? That is the only thing that we've accomplished for now. That we don't have, that we're not adding apples and oranges at the total line. There's nothing, there's no value to be shown. What we need in order to also include those formats is somehow in your dimension table, what you need to include is a format string. Okay, you got to somehow either you produce this yourself or you pull one off the internet, or somehow you got to, the way that these numbers, these currencies are formatted in the particular countries, you got to include those in your dimension table in an additional column, like so. Because if you did, you can use that in a calculation group. I'm going to remove the format string again. Yeah. So we're going over to a different property. Right now, I'm just in the actual expression of the calculation item itself. But as you can tell here, I can switch that and say I want to edit a different property. I want to edit the format string expression. Now I can do all sorts of stuff here. I can also say, show me this in millions, right? 2 commas, and then I get to see this in millions, or in thousands. So I'd be able to do anything, but I can also just say, give me the selected value, whatever the selected value is in the filter context of that format string. There you go. So that's pretty cool. And it will work in any other kind of visual. I'm not sure any other visual, but most visuals, like if you were to convert this to a map. Oh, I'm not online, so that's not going to work. I'm not online here, but maybe any other visual, and you just get it's really nice. I mean, for people, if they are consuming a report and the currencies get actually formatted for the way that they are used to, that really helps. Makes it easier to consume a report like that. Okay. So that is as far as local is concerned. So also we want to have that second option. Say I want to convert this into euros, right? So we need a calculation group in order to do that. So create a new calculation item, and this is going to be euro. So here what we're going to say is divide whatever the selected measure might be, and divide that by a spot rate. So I also have that selected value of the spot rate. Right? I have those rates. You also need somehow to include the conversion rates in your model somehow. Whether you want to set this up dynamic, usually you do, right? You want to have end of day spot rates or something like that. But you need conversion rates. And so I have those in my model. So what I'm just going to say, take your selected measure, whatever the selected measure might be, and divide that by your conversion rate, by the spot rates. So now here, yeah, we need to refresh. I included an additional calculation item. So say to euros, and there you go, bam. It all gets replaced. So, and indeed, it doesn't matter. I take net sales or I take gross sales, right? That's not the point here. Or put in a better way, the whole point is that it works regardless of the measure that I'm including here. Euros, we do want to sum them. Now, I know there's someone that is saying that the measure totals are broken here in Power BI. I'm not getting a total here. Yeah, and there is no option, and I think it's not going to take long before Microsoft is actually going to do that. We'll see. There's a lot of debate on it. That here under your totals, you can just say, in this, I want to have the total be the sum or the. For now, that is not available yet, so we got to DAX that. So let me go back over to the calculation item. And so what we're going to say, I want you to run by all of the countries. So I'm going to use sumx, go by all of these countries. And for every country in filter context, so I need to use calculate in order to trigger context transition. Say go by all of these individual countries. For each of them, determine the rate in euros and then sum all of the results, right? That is actually what we're doing here. And now we get a result here at the total line. Pretty cool. And then yes, we did want to format that as well. So here under euro, I'm going to go over to the format expression. I have it here somewhere. Yeah. There we go. Cool. Oh, this is it. This is actually exactly what we were out for. This user experience. So calculation groups, your best friend if you want to set something like this up. Okay. However, yeah, there is one additional challenge. In life, there will always be additional challenge. What if I got my sales quantity, for instance? Now it's also going to do that to my sales quantity. And that doesn't make sense. So somehow we gotta avoid this from happening, right? So we gotta protect the code, protect the DAX expression in the calculation item. So I gotta move back over here and say for the local, yep, to the expression. Or the format expression. So what we're able to say, if is selected measure if is selected measure, and then you can select all the measures that you want to exclude. So indeed sales quantity, but for the discount percentage, it also wouldn't make any sense. So we want to also add that here, discount percentage. So if that is the case, if this test evaluates for true, yeah, so then what we want you to do, give me the selected measure format string. Yeah. But if not, then we do want to have all of this. And there you go. So now Quantity won't do that anymore. Gross sales will. Nor would discount percentage, of course. That would also just do what it's. And I would have to protect my code. If I would move over to euros, I would have to protect my code the exact same way. Okay? Yes, so that is my second scenario. Then there's a third scenario that I also want to share with you. Here you go. Because I have clients, I consult, I have clients that, and they say, Marnix, you told us about how great Power BI is in terms of visualizing data. Yeah, we don't care. We want this. If you don't do it, because you said that Power BI is better, but better is different and therefore worse. Yeah, how are you going to argue with that, right? You can't argue with that logic. Yeah, so you're going to have to just do what they tell you to. This here in Power BI. But of course, it's a little harder, right? I usually have discussions with clients say, in Excel, this is very easy. You just go here, let me show you. Yeah, but that doesn't work that way in Power BI. You have to really set that up. It's a little harder. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and see if we can come up with this result in Power BI. So what we first need is somehow get those four values, right? The 3 months, and the Y to D percentage in the column headers of a matrix. So we somehow need to include that in our in the data. That can be a measure, right? You can have measures, results of a measure in the column headers of a matrix. It has to be an additional column in a table. Okay, so we need to set that up somehow. So let's go over here, because obviously I came prepared. So I have this here. DAX expression for an additional table. There you go. So it's actually consists out of 2 parts. So I take the last 3 months, and since I'm using the formula today, it will get updated automatically. Yeah. So this is dynamic. It's going to give me the last 3 months based upon today's date, and then it'll union. So it'll include that one additional row with that Y to D percentage value that my client wants. So if I enter this, then I get these here values in a additional table. Yeah? So then we can start using it. And yes, I did also make sure that we have a sort order. Using these here values, what we can do now, say give me a matrix and use that non-name value as the column headers. There you go. Make sure that we set the sorting order. Sort by the sort order. And there you go. Well, that's a good start, right? We already have that. That looks like the way that my client wants to see this is used to see this in Excel before. Then we need an additional measure in order to populate this here table. So let me take the DAX expression. I'll explain as I go. A new measure. Yep. So we're doing a switch again. So the selected value, so what you got in your column header, right, that will be entered into the filter context. If that is the Y to D percentage, then we want you to do some kind of calculation. But if not, so you have to be one of these 3 months, right, then we just want you to take the net sales. However, we do want to, in this case, virtually propagate the filter context, make sure that a filter applied on this new column is also pushed to the dimension calendar. And then on account of the physical relationship, that will propagate all the way to the fact table. Yeah, so I do need to also include the 3-dash. So now, let me go ahead and use this here formula that I just created. And we want to slice this by, what do we want to do? Categories. Yeah. So I'm going to also go ahead and do just that. So let me take your dim products. There you go. Anyone familiar with the data set? Adventure works, right? Anyhow, so I think I need to filter this down to 2013. Here. List. There you go. So the values now are the same. We have the exact same values. However, the formatting, of course, is not the same, and we don't have those data bars yet. So setting that format, yes, of course, you can use the format formula here. So go into the measure, and then here, use that format formula, here you go, for both of them, and then change the way the numbers get formatted in my chart. However, that would convert the values to text. And then once they're text, I can't use those for data labels anymore, right? Text is text. You can have the data labels based upon text. So that wouldn't work. that solution wouldn't work, not for this scenario. So what we, and also if you want to base additional measures up on the one that you created now, if you use the format formula, you won't be able to, right? Because you actually converted the data type into text. So what are we going to do? We're going to, well, obviously, we want to use calculation groups. So let me move over here again. And include, create a calculation group. And we're going to call this calculation group format. Add a new calculation item. Format as well. Yep. And so what we're going to say, if the selected value of that here column that I just created, right? If the selected value, if that would equal y to the percentage, if that is true, then we want you to format this. Let me keep it simple for now, just like so. But if not, we want to have just values, not percentages, but just values. Okay. Move over here. Yeah, I need to refresh this again. That is true. And there you go. So we take the format one. Add it over here. Oh, wait a minute. I know, I did this in the expression property. So some people saw me do that and they didn't say anything. Yeah, no, I did this on purpose for the learning experience. Yeah, right. Because obviously in the actual expression, well, you can't leave this blank, right? If you leave it blank, you get a calculation error, so you got to say, do whatever the selected measure is. There you go. And now it works. And yes, I would be able, so this weekend, we don't need this anymore, right? View selection, let's hide this. So here, let's go ahead and, here, conditional format, turn on the data labels. There you go. We have a set-aside client because nothing changed. All right? Also, those are 3 use cases, and there are way more, right? When it comes to using calculation groups, you might bump into a situation where you have a problem, and then this might very well be your solution. I know most people used it for reducing the amount of measures, right? For that very first scenario, that is a very common use case. You got 400 different measures, you reduce that to 20, 30, really, literally. So that is a very common use case, but there's more. And that's actually all I wanted to tell you guys about calculation groups. Any questions? Everything clear? Anyone?
Hear me? Oh, yeah. So one quick question. When would a calculation group not be a good idea? What are the drawbacks of using it potentially?
Drawbacks of using it. Well, you got a drawback, and that would be that you wouldn't be able to use implicit measures anymore, right? So if you use calculation groups, then by default the tabular model doesn't. So implicit measures, right? So you have a table in your on your report page, and you just want to go ahead and let me remove this. I have a table, and kind of count, and I just want to add some kind of value out of a fact table, which you shouldn't do, right? You shouldn't use implicit measures anyhow. But now if I take the unit prices, it won't work anymore. See, I can't use those as values. Because usually if I were to do so, if I add a numeric column, a numeric column out of a fact table and just add that column to the values field of a matrix, then it would get converted into an actual DAX expression below the hood. Yeah? That is referred to as an implicit measures, and again, you shouldn't be using implicit measures. You always want to spell out your DAX explicitly. Any calculation that you want to do, make sure that you write a DAX measure. Don't do it this way. But sometimes, when you're just playing around for your own purposes, right? You're just messing around, and then you can't use it. It's a little annoying. And then also the formatting. The formatting is also, that is a little different, works a little different. But so that would be a drawback. Gentleman in the back. Oh, am I going to share this? I haven't considered that yet. We could, yeah, we can arrange something for that. Okay. So, yes. To what extent is this available in Excel? Oh, a calculation. Yeah, so if you have a model published to the Power BI service and your users use Analyze in Excel, then this is going to be available. Say again? Better. It works even better in Excel than in Power BI. Can you elaborate, Marco? Would you mind?
As a joke, because Excel, when you create a calculation group, what happens from the MDX standpoint is just a measure, MDX, that has a property for everything, including the format string.
Right.
The format string is not dynamic in DAX today, and so they had to, only now the custom visuals support custom format string for the calculation groups. If you have a custom visual that has been implemented before, I think 2 or 3 months ago, it doesn't support the format string of the calculation group.
Right.
So now they can support it, but you have to wait for the vendor of the custom visual, to support the calculation group.
Right.
Excel doesn't have this problem because for Excel is just measure, is a normal measure, it just works.
This works. There you go. Even better. Thanks, Marco. Any other questions? Alrighty then. So let me hand it back to Chris, if you don't mind.